So, good afternoon and welcome to the RI Regenerative Agriculture video chat for today. Today we'll be discussing funding opportunities for regenerative agriculture. And we've invited at least 5 experts and people active in this topic to share with us today. We're going to get started with David Montgomery. David, thanks for joining us. If you want to give a brief introduction of yourself and take about 5 minutes or a little bit more if you need to share with us on funding for regenerative agriculture.
Sure. Well, I am a geologist and a writer, and I've been writing books about the relationship of soil to society that led me to most recently write a book, Growing Revolution, that looks at regenerative agriculture as a way to really reverse the long-term trends of soil degradation that's affected society after society. And I suspect that most of the people that are on a call like this will already be sort of aware of those broad general issues. But I come to this whole issue from a fairly different perspective than I think a lot of people that are participating in what I like to view as a movement to sort of push a soil health revolution as the next really big change in agriculture. And then I've come from a very long-term perspective. And in terms of looking at the funding potential or potential mechanisms for funding regenerative agriculture, most of what I've been involved with has been in trying to generate support for the communication about regenerative agriculture, how to try and spread the ideas that are underpinning it to more farmers so they can be more aware of it, and also to the general public so they can be more supportive of it. And it's been, so my experience mostly with the support and the funding realm of this is trying to actually find support so that I could go and visit farmers, interview them, and also find, frankly, the time to actually be able to write about it instead of doing my normal day job, which is one of those sort of 100% plus jobs as a university professor. So my perspective on the funding end of it is I'll split into sort of 2 pieces. The first piece is how do people actually try and generate support for spreading the word on it? And the other would be a few very brief thoughts on how we could be better at actually funding farmers to make the transition to regenerative agriculture and to actually adopt those practices. On the first front, the most effective way to actually fund outreach and communication that I've found so far has been through foundations, and in particular private individuals who are philanthropists who are very interested in getting the word out about regenerative agriculture and communicating to a broader audience. That's a funding source that as a scientist, I was never trained to think about. I was never trained to really understand how to go and try and pursue. And it's been very educational for me to try and actually look into that as a mechanism for being able to get time to participate in the communication end of regenerative agriculture. And I think there's actually a lot of potential because there's a lot of people out there who have means, who really support these ideas, and who are far-thinking individuals who have a vision for the future that they'd like to see changed off of the trajectory that it's on. So I'd encourage people to think about partnering with organizations or individuals who have the capacity to support these kind of efforts. And I've run into a few people who are starting either companies or are making or have companies that are investing in regenerative farms, either buying them outright and converting them, or a few people who have talked about trying to provide assistance for transition, sort of short-term investments for making the transition and getting people through a conversion period. So that's essentially one end of things. The other, in terms of how to actually get support for farmers to make the transition, I think that where the biggest potential for support should lie, but that it isn't yet, is actually through government programs in terms of trying to encourage and subsidize the transition to regenerative farming from conventional farming. There's sort of piecemeal programs that people can dip into for pieces of equipment and other things. But again, as a geologist, I'm the wrong person to sort of guide anybody to the specifics of those programs. I think I'm probably at about the 5-minute mark, so I'd be glad to stop there and hand it over to whoever's next and entertain questions if folks have them.
Rachel, you're on mute.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, David.
Sure.
Let's continue on to Laura. Laura, do you want to share with us for 5 minutes or a little bit more if you need?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. It's great that I'm following David because I have specifics about government programs. So a little bit about my background. I'm trained as a soil scientist. I've done research and education work and also worked as a farmer during my career. I have experience with soil health and sustainable cropping systems, sustainable decision making, and most recently climate risk and resilience planning. I'm the author of a book called Resilient Agriculture that was published in 2015. And my book makes the argument that agriculture and food systems have the capacity to drive a recovery from industrialism. And to achieve this recovery, we have to regenerate social and ecological resources that have been degraded by industrialism. So I chose the title Resilient Agriculture for my book because I wanted to highlight the value of applying resilient science and social ecological thinking to the design and assessment of agriculture and food systems. And I just want to encourage everybody on the call to put a little bit of time into learning more about resilience. And my book is a good start if you're working in the first world, but there's plenty of other resources to learn about resilience as it applies to agriculture and food systems. And I'd be happy to share a list of resources with this group if you'd like. The reason I think it's important for folks who are interested in thinking about regenerative agriculture is that if you spend a little time learning about how resilience applies to food systems, you'll see that regenerative agriculture addresses only part of the picture. Agriculture is a social ecological system. And I think that holistic approaches to the regeneration of ecological health are a great start and an important part of this work. But I don't think that regenerative agriculture can be successful in and of itself if it fails to include social considerations. So that said, I do think the ecological focus, this more limited scope of regenerative agriculture, offers some powerful benefits to educating and finding sources of support for research and development. Because the more limited your question, in my experience, the easier it is to explain and be successful in developing support and grants and working with individuals and nonprofits as well. I think the key to leveraging current resources for regenerative agriculture will be to use their language, use the language of the agricultural funders that you're interested in approaching. And I think that the goals of regenerative agriculture fit really well with current interest and community in the agricultural community. The goals of soil health, healthy water cycle, community dynamics, and carbon negative farming and the associated practices are all widely recognized as sustainable agriculture in government and philanthropic communities. So that's a big plus. But I do think based on my review of regenerative agriculture literature, you're probably going to want to shift your language a little bit and begin to use the language of these goals that are used by the funders. The second is the second plus I think that regenerative agriculturalists have is that the focus on ecosystem health makes it an easier sell to funders than the broader social ecological focus of sustainable agriculture. The third is the focus on carbon sequestration potential of agriculture, of course, connects really well to climate change action. A fourth strength is, or benefit, is the focus on ecosystem services. In regenerative agriculture connects really well to climate smart agriculture. And the last strength of the regen approach is the focus on holistic land management connects to broader areas of adaptive management, and then also obviously to specific kinds of practices like holistic management, whole farm management. So my point in trying to point out these connections with current and existing kinds of ideas going on already in sustainable agriculture is that I think regenerative agriculturalists can link up and step into those kinds of conversations pretty effectively if they wanted to. Just two other points I wanted to share based on my travels and talking with people in Europe and all over the US about regenerative agriculture, organic farming, resilient agriculture. I think the most important questions or criticisms or concerns that I hear about regenerative agriculture are three. And the first one is, I think that there's still a lot of confusion and not a lot of real data to support the question of potential and feasible sequestration. I have been able to find very little evidence for the estimates used by the Regen Ag community. These estimates are 4 to 8 times higher than current estimates being used in the climate change community. So that's an area that I think deserves some attention. The second is, what are the steps of transition? It's really, what are the steps of transition between from conventional to regenerative agriculture? It's pretty tricky to adopt regen practices in conventional systems. So I think we need, in a sort of a stepwise fashion. So I think that we need projects to figure out how to transition, and also what resources are needed by conventional farmers and ranchers in order to do this. And then the third big question, I think, is what are the costs and benefits of holistic management? There's almost no evidence to support the claims that are out there. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence and great stories, but we don't have a whole lot of database or research-based evidence for their benefits. So that's the third important question. Again, I think to be successful in finding financial support for projects and programs, regen agriculturalists would be really well served to learn the language of your potential funders and to use it. I have one example that came out just recently. It's a story around the guidance that was given in USDA about language to use and not to use associated with climate change. And the direct guidance, if you're going to work with programs that are funded by the federal government or receive funding somehow through they may be local or regional, but they receive federal funding through USDA. Instead of using climate change, use weather extremes. Instead of using climate change adaptation, use the word resilience to weather extremes. Instead of talking about reducing greenhouse gases, say instead that you want to build soil organic matter or increase nutrient use efficiency. And instead of sequestering carbon, talk about building soil organic matter. These may seem like small shifts in language, but I think if we pay attention to the language that's appropriate for any particular funder, we'll be a lot more successful in leveraging funds.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Yep. I'd like to add one more thing, if I can. The last thing, I just wanted to give you some specific places to go to look for funding. We can do that later if you'd like, or I can just put those up also. If we could just have them in the notes if you'd like to do that.
If you have a quick list, it'd be great to hear them, and you can also post them in the comments section as well if you have links.
Sure, I will do that. So I tried to organize them in terms of type of funding. So examples of government funding. I think there's a lot of potential for local, regional, and state funding in food policy councils and in food resilience planning efforts. For the U.S., a great first stop would be the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. They have a grassroots guide to federal farm and food programs. And I will share these links. If you're in Europe, The European Commission on Agriculture and Rural Development is a great kind of first stop to look for specific funding in sustainable agriculture. And in the international arena, there are, I think there'll be a lot of potential funding under climate smart agriculture programs. So notice that the language changes depending on the source of funding. The philanthropic organizations, a great start for folks working, well, a great start would be, there are two places I know of that have great search engines and can give you a lot of information, allow you to search by region, by topic. The first is the Foundation Center, and the second is Inside Philanthropy. I think there's also a lot of potential to partner with businesses. Businesses are already working hard to develop sustainable supply chains, and a way into those businesses is often through the sustainability office or the director of sustainability. So specific businesses, perhaps in your area, a group that's online that you can begin to see what companies are really the innovators in sustainable supply chains, and thinking about sustainability as a series coalition. And then the other obvious partners would be nonprofits around specific topics. And I think two that come to mind, or three that come to mind, are around holistic management. We've got Holistic Management International and Savory. And also the Soil Health Institute is a new institute that is looking at these issues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Laura. Courtney, are you on the phone? Courtney White was hoping to join us as well, but he may not have been able to at the last minute. So let's move on. Judith, would you share with us?
Sure. Hi there. Hi, everybody. Before I forget, just that there is a new podcast on investing in regenerative agriculture, and it's on SoundCloud. I can get a link. I'll find a link after I talk, and that has some good thinking, good ideas, what people are talking about. So mostly I want to share my experience going to the co-dialogue on land and security, which because obtaining resources for land regeneration was a big part of that event. So basically, this is a meeting, like a 4-day meeting in Switzerland that has been going on since 2011. And it's organized by two groups, Land, Lives, and Peace, which is a partner organization with RI, and the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. So this year there were three kind of tracks, okay? One was peace and governance, one was investment, and one was restoration. And what was interesting is that so there was a real understanding. I mean, this is a slightly different slant from what some of us are talking about with funding, but it all connects. Is that there's an understanding that many of the conflicts that we're experiencing today is an outcome of land degradation. So working on restoring landscapes has a peace and governance component, but also people were, and I got the sense that this really has changed from previous years, looking at opportunities and trying to draw investment to this area. So there were a number of people, and just as an example, well, okay, so there are, CO has a young leaders program, and so a number of young thinkers and innovators were presenting their businesses. So that was really exciting to see that a lot of young people are coming up with ideas that are valid and people can invest in. And apparently one young woman one of her ideas that she had presented in previous years has now become this really interesting. At first I found it kind of scary, but it became less scary as I went on. I don't know if you all have heard of biocarbon engineering. I'll also post that. It's a company that uses drone technology to reforest at scale. So I'll post that, but it was just interesting that people are coming up with different solutions to diminished ecological function. And another presenter was Common Land. I don't know if you all know of Common Land, but it's Willem Verwerda's. He's the founder, but it creates opportunities to invest in land restoration. And one of the challenges, or one of the points that he's made, is that for investors, you need to think beyond what's going to happen next quarter, even what's going to happen next 5 years, but on a 20-year horizon. And there were also several others. I have them in my notes, but nothing was recorded there. But I also want to mention one more talk about the challenges of gearing money towards regenerative practices and projects. Luke Gnakaja, who was for several years the executive secretary of the UNCCD, he said that one important tool to steer funds towards land restoration is to show how many benefits one gets, okay? And he was talking about the metric of social return on investment, and how when you use a metric like that, the outcomes are incredible. That for every dollar that is invested, that how many dollars are recouped in terms of the problems that are solved, the wealth that is created in local communities, etc. And in one project that involved farmer-managed natural regeneration in Ghana, that after 7 years, the social return on investment was $17 for every dollar invested. And he also talked about looking in terms of preparedness, which is essentially resilience, and how it's understood that for every dollar spent on preparedness basically yields $5 on funds that don't need to be spent on crisis management. So yeah, I'm just seeing that there's much more energy and much interest in this area. So thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Mary, are you with us? Mary Johnson, with Center for Sustainability Solutions.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Mary. Do you want to share with us for about 5 minutes?
Yes. Let's see. I was having some trouble with Zoom, so I guess I'm not able to get on video, but I am the director of a new supply chain innovation network that's focus is around creating transformational scale shift through the market system to get more unity and resources flowing into a global climate solution through agriculture. So reversing the climate arrow. And our audacious goal is to sort of shift us from the 450 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere that we're at now back down to something more livable like 280, where humans have evolved agriculture over time. It's a new supply chain innovation network, and it's a collaborative approach where we bring together different pieces of the supply chain, leaders from all aspects of the supply chain, to work together on innovations that are needed to drive these key shifts. So I'm going to share just a few examples of some of the funding mechanisms that folks may be interested in, and I'm going to try and just give some examples. So one of my first points for folks who are listening to think about if you're looking to find funding is to really recognize whether you're looking for funding that's applicable at a local scale and an individual farm scale versus the global scale, whether you're looking to access finance and shift something across these larger transactional spaces, because the types of funders you'd be looking for will be very different. And as others have mentioned, the kind of language that you need and the terminology that you're going to express your sort of offer to that entity is going to differ. So figure that out first. And then if we look at some different market-based funding opportunities, the first one I want to sort of talk about is an example of a social innovation. And so this is an institutional direct investment example out in the California, San Francisco Bay Area, where some institutions have joined forces in a way that they're able to connect financing that they're spending in their institutions, which is large-scale purchasing of farm products, to enhance the local and regional scale opportunity for emerging regenerative farmers and farm processing food businesses. And I don't know this one personally, so I don't know how significant their emphasis is on regenerative agriculture, but it's certainly a good example for folks to experiment with in that local regional scale. So in this instance, a number of schools, hospitals, you could do this with other large purchasing organizations like jails, elder care facilities. They've pooled resources together and built their own local food processing center. And then that food gets delivered into these systems where they have daily meals prepared for the students or the hospital patients. And so the people in those systems are getting healthier food. The farmers are getting a big opportunity to sell food, and it's sort of a relocalizing of the food system. So the next example I want to talk about is just thinking about things from an innovative design perspective. And so looking for examples of things that are working, and then adapting them to your own situation and shifting the design, but thinking about the design parameters that have equaled success in other examples. So one other example I want to share is one that's coming out of Indonesia, where the intention was forest preservation and conservation and providing livelihood income for forest-dwelling communities, protecting biodiversity, and stopping sort of the massive deforestation caused by African palm oil colonization. And this design layers multiple income streams that are all supportive of conservation forestry and multi-strata agroforestry systems. And it's a design for a clean energy and micro-food processing center. It is based around sort of a keystone species of a native sugar palm that can be tapped on a daily basis for a sugary sap that can be boiled down to produce a nutrient-rich, low glycemic sugar that can also then be converted and fermented into a biofuel. That's a perennial biofuel, so a net carbon sequestering system design. So people can look up this if you Google the Village Hub and the Masarang Foundation in Indonesia. Willie Smits is the designer of this system. And so in that design of the actual micro-processing center, it's a permaculture style design. So the waste product of one component becomes the fuel product of another component. So instead of producing one output for sale. It produces multiple high-value products at the same time, while also producing things of social value to the communities like clean water, biochar, organic fertilizer, clean cooking fuel from a small methane digester. It's just layered with an incredible number of outputs, both for the community members and things that they can sell, and then the product profits are split in a cooperative fashion to reinvest in reforesting with and protecting the forests there. So a couple of other examples of things that are working is one that has been around for a while, so crowdsourcing. You know, Kiva was something that a group of folks that I work with was interested in trying to support regenerative farmers with a while ago, more than 5 or so years ago. And we reached out to them and asked them if there was a way that they could filter the farmers in their system by those doing regenerative organic practices, and at that time they couldn't do that. So I'm happy to see and sort of promote this new platform that Regeneration International is involved in promoting called Grow Ahead. So using that kind of social innovation and helping move your own communities towards investing locally and spreading the wealth that's needed to be put back into the systems that not only provide our food products, but then can also provide all of these other ecosystem services to regenerate the places that we live or places far from us that we want to be involved in. So I'm just going to take a couple more minutes with a couple more examples. Another new and growing kind of opportunity are these eco-social investor circles. And so these are groups that are bringing together different types of investors, and that allows them to spread a risk threshold and a return threshold. So certain kinds of investors like foundations who have money that needs to be held somewhere in the meantime while they're looking for things to put it into in a philanthropic way, that money, instead of being invested in destructive things, can be invested in positive projects like regenerative agriculture products. And they may be the kind of investor that isn't looking for sort of a market rate on return. They may be more interested in some of those social returns that others were talking about. And so if they're pooled in with some of the more typical types of market investors who still want a market rate on return, there's more flexibility to collaboratively invest in a whole portfolio of projects and have those investors get what they want back out of the return, and to look for projects that have both ecological and social outcomes along with the financial outcomes. So I have a list of groups that are working in that space. If people are interested in seeing that list, I can add it to the notes. But there's a growing number of those out there. So if people search for that kind of investor group, they can connect with ones that are working in their region or who are interested in looking in their type of project. They typically have different scales that they'll work at and different types of projects that they're looking for. And often they're at a much larger scale than the individual farm level. So that's where looking more at the larger scale, regional scale, and pooling farmers together with a nonprofit or someone who can help kind of aggregate those overall benefits and explain them in the language that an investor circle would need in order to make this kind of investment is a gap that sort of needs to be filled in the interim as we're trying to grow this regenerative agriculture sector. There's also direct supply chain investments that someone else mentioned. So where companies are connecting directly with farmers or even buying their own farmland to meet their own growing demand for regeneratively produced products. Some of them are even going so far as trying to offset their carbon emissions by spending their own money to pay for projects that will capture carbon and maybe do that in a way that's going to feed them out food or fiber product that's going into their production system. And more of that could happen, sort of getting the actors together and making those relationships beneficial for both sides is sort of a new space that needs some more attention. And I think personally there's some mismatch that there needs to be some additional folks like foundations or nonprofits or others who can help when those relationships go awry, because I think farmers are more vulnerable than the companies in those relationships sometimes, and they don't always speak to each other's needs and meet each other's needs with the kind of compassion and social regeneration that I think most people are hoping for at the best case scenario with regenerative agriculture. So there's some work to do there, but it's an emerging space.
Mary, thanks for all your sharing.
Yes.
If you want to wrap up quickly, we have one more person to get
Sure.
to. We want to make sure we get to questions.
Great. The last one is just a gap that we need to be starting to look at, and that's trying to tap into the research funding for the proof of this whole system. And right now, most of the research institutions in agriculture are completely taken over by the chemical industry. There's no more public funding going into agricultural research and extension service. So we need to flip that around if we're going to be able to make these innovations and the advances that are needed to really grow this space. That I don't have an answer to yet, but we're working on it. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Mary. Thanks for that download. Did Courtney White join the call? Okay. Alex Groom, who's also part of Regeneration International, is now also partnering with Grow Ahead. So Alex, do you want to speak on behalf of what you guys are doing at Grow Ahead? Alex, I can't hear you. Are you on mute?
My headphones.
You're not coming through.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Now we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Headphones. Darn it. Okay. So yeah, I started off by saying I'll be brief so that we can leave time for discussions. I'll try and take less than 5. So I wanted to start building on what David Montgomery said at the beginning of the webinar today, that one of the biggest potentials for funding in regenerative ag is through government programs, but unfortunately not very many governments, if any, right now are really bringing support for regenerative ag. And so Grow Ahead seeks to fill this funding gap. So Grow Ahead is an online lending and funding program geared towards supporting the global transition to regenerative agriculture by boosting the resilience of farming communities on the front lines of climate change. As speakers today have mentioned, we believe a critical first step in advancing regenerative ag is supporting the transition of current farmers. And we're building a movement to support this through crowdfunding from individuals and organizations. So to give you an idea of how powerful crowdfunding can be, in 2015, it was estimated that $34 billion was raised through online crowdfunding. So we think there's a lot of potential in this area to generate support for regenerative agriculture. So Grow Ahead relaunched this May with 3 programs. So I'll give you a brief intro to those programs. So the first one is a revolving loan program. The other is supporting farmer-to-farmer exchanges, and the other is scholarships for farm leaders to attend trainings on like biodynamic agriculture or any of the practices that fall under the regenerative umbrella. And so right now we have 2 crowdfunding campaigns that you can either support by like donating if you have the funds, or simply spreading the word, or sharing it with others that you know. So the first one is a farmer-to-farmer training for coffee farmers in Nicaragua. So the farmer-to-farmer training movement came out of Central America, I think in the 1980s. And it's been kind of dubbed the quickest and most effective way to scale up and out agroecology. And it's fueled the training of thousands of peasant farmers all over the world through peer-to-peer exchange of best practices. So we've partnered with Cooperative Coffees and an organization called Taking Root in Nicaragua. And the training will be on reforestation. They've been operating a successful community-led project for over 10 years. And the training will include how to measure soil carbon on your farm. So we think that there's a lot of potential here. 30 coffee farmers from across Latin America will be gathering. And we've raised 2/3 of our goal. So we're almost there, and we'd appreciate it if you could help spread the word on that. And the second crowdfunding campaign that we have going right now is scholarships for farm leaders to, again, in the coffee industry, to attend a training on organic agriculture in Honduras with one of the leaders in the organic coffee production space. They're called COMSA. They do great work. I'll include a link in the notes. And then upcoming exciting ways to get involved. We're going to be accepting applications for microloans. So loans to support climate resilience on the farm. And so we'll definitely send a message out to everyone about that. We're currently focused on the global south. Maybe in the future we'll get into farms in the global north, but we see a huge need to support boosting resilience for the small farmers in the global south. I'm sure most of you are aware here that they produce 80% of the world's food. So we think that's an area of that needs to be focused on to start with. And the second upcoming opportunity that I wanted to mention today is that we're rolling out a business partnerships program. So Laura, you mentioned that partnering with businesses is a good potential area to focus. And so if anyone here knows of any mission-driven brands who share our values and might want to support the global transition to regenerative ag, we'd appreciate an introduction. So yeah, I'll end there. Check out growahead.org and don't hesitate to contact me if you want to reach out, coordinator@growahead.org. And I also just wanted to give a shout out to a really great course on Coursera called Landscape Restoration for Sustainable Development. I think it's a good place to go and learn how to speak the language of funders, and really gives you a great idea of the business case for landscape restoration. So thanks for organizing, Rachel.
Thanks for joining, Alex. Would you put up a link to Grow Ahead and also that Coursera course name?
Sure. I think Judy already put a link up. Great minds.
Oh, okay, awesome. Okay, thanks for that massive download, everybody. We don't have any questions in the comments section. I'm going to open the floor for questions. It can be a broad question or specifically to one of the speakers.
Rachel?
Yes.
We have Sally Dodge with us, and she's been involved in a significant model for funding regenerative agriculture. Maybe we can hear from her for a couple of minutes?
Absolutely. Sally, can you share with us?
You're on mute, Sally. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, for suggesting that. I am, along with my husband, Dale Gilbranson, we're the Northeast representatives for Iroquois Valley Farms, which is a triple bottom line social and environmental food and farmland company that connects local, organic, and sustainable farmers to farmland. We're not a fund, we're not a nonprofit or an angel investor network or a farmland broker, but rather we're a socially responsible farmland investment company that supports family farmers, improves food security, and enhances local economies. We improve soil health and protect water quality and supply, and we supply a slow money financial return to a new class of private investors, and we are a certified B Corp. So we are a real investment company, and we invest in farmland for particular farmers. The farmer comes to us, wants us to buy him 100 acres. We will buy that land once we all work out the business plan, make sure that the farmer's going to be successful with that, and that we will be able to get a small return. And then we lease that farmland back to the farmer for a period of about 7 years, after which the farmer may then buy the land from us. We have about 300 socially responsible investors, and we right now, after 10 years in business, we have 50 farms and 37 different farmers. We help those farmers through transition. We make the lease arrangement easier and less onerous. I'm not going to say it's onerous anyway, but I mean it's just less while they're going through transition, and then as they're able to sell their products, we require that they be organic, and we are advocating regenerative practices. We figure regenerative means stopping the use of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers right to begin with, and then we work with the farmers advocating up for all the 5 different principles of soil health that we believe in. Our investors are very interested in the impacts of what they're investing in, not only the return, that's sometimes like third on the list, and they're interested in healthy food, a healthy planet, healthy soils, and reversing climate change. Our business model is completely scalable. We are only limited by the amount of money that we can invest, and so far we're about a $40 million company. So we for those 50 farms. Our investors are passionate, principled, mission-driven, socially responsible group. Often they're people who are divesting from fossil fuels and want to put their money where it makes a big impact, positive impact for the planet. A lot of people use their IRAs, which is just money that's sitting around at 1% in a Calvert fund maybe anyway. They'll put it into Iroquois Valley farms and know that they're doing good for the farmers, for regenerative agriculture, and for the planet. They also understand the link between responsible regenerative farming and the health of the planet. And they also are people who are interested in social justice and animal welfare. So that's pretty much what we're doing. And we are passionate about slowing climate change through that model. The other thing we do besides actually buying farmland and leasing it back to the farmer, we also now are financing farms for various farmers. We do this through equity investment in the company, young farmer access notes, which are the equity, is a long-term thing. Investors who invest must invest their money for at least 7 years. We've now been in business for 10 years, and we've only had one investor who's actually wanted to sell their stock back, and that was because they had some kind of family financial problems. So people put their money and they keep it there. Our access notes, we have two different debt instruments. One is Young Farmer Access Notes, which return about a 3% return, and they have a term of, I think it's 5 years. And then we have our Soil Restoration Notes, which we introduced last fall, and they return 1.5%, so that and people can cash them in after 2 years. So,
Sally, thanks so much. Very impressive work. Any burning questions for our speakers? Or in between our speakers?
or burning answers?
Yes.
I don't know that I have burning answers. I just wanted to put in a plug for Biodiversity for Livable Climate's upcoming conference on November 17th through 19th. And it's kind of we're not quite clear on it yet, but it's we've had 9 conferences in the past 3 years that are talking about eco-restoration, various kinds, oceans, water cycles, urban, etc., and how that contributes to a reversal of climate change and regenerative land management, etc. And this year, we want to connect the dots because everything is connected and everything changes everything else in systems mindset. And there was an article that came out a few years ago called Soil Organic Matter as an Ecosystem Property, which some of you may have read. And the point is that there's no entity, whether it's biochar or microbial community or anything, that has qualities of its own that are separate from the qualities of its context, from its surroundings. So you put biochar in one place, it'll last 50 years. You put it in another place, it'll last 5,000 years. And that completely changes the scientific and other views of what we're studying. And I think we need to go through a major change in our science and in our research to reflect that. And it's starting to happen. And one other commercial is we created a document called Compendium, it's a long name, Compendium of Scientific and Practical Findings Supporting Eco-Restoration to Address Global Warming. It's got a lot of interesting things in it, I think, and some of it will be controversial. I think we need to give a lot more scientific respect to anecdotal information, and put peer-reviewed science into perspective as well. It is not the only standard out there. So I invite you all to check it out. And final thing I will say is that 10 years ago, Paul Hawken wrote a book called Blessed Unrest, in which he discusses and I've mentioned this before in this chat, in which he discusses little things happening all across the world that are along the lines of regeneration and restoration and peace and all that good stuff. And these people don't know about each other, and these groups don't know about each other. And what Paul was saying is that at some point, there's going to be a tipping point, and we're going to start learning about each other in a big way. And the tipping point has arrived. This chat is one indication, but there's much more out there. And so hold on to your hats.
Thanks, Adam. If there's any burning questions, let me know. I have a question for Mary and Sally and David. What kinds of farms are currently getting investment? Like, what are they producing exactly?
Well, I can tell you from our point of view, we have farms in the Midwest that are doing row crops. So they, instead of just doing corn and soybeans, they're doing beans for Chipotle restaurants. These are all organic. Obviously, they've transitioned to organic. There's a farm that we helped up in Montana that's doing a lot of different grains like kamut and quinoa and those kinds of grains for Nature's Path. So a lot of the grains and the row crops are coming from those. We've got a lot of dairy farms. We have 4 dairy farms in New York State, 1 grass-fed dairy in Virginia. We have beef farms. There's a beef farm in Vermont. We have CSAs. We have a wonderful pork farm in Minnesota, and then also a great farm also in Minnesota called Main Street Project, which is raising chickens, and that's a Latino project. It's really interesting, Main Street Project. Just all different kinds of farms. We're actually hoping that we'll get a hemp farm pretty soon.
Okay.
So, yes, I will say we're also doing. We support small to medium-sized family farms. We're not one of those land investment companies that comes in and buys 20,000 acres. Our farms are generally between as little as 50 and as many as 500 acres.
Yeah. Just from conversation today, it sounds like there are a lot of different avenues and a lot of different resources. Do we know of anybody that's keeping an eye on these, that's skilled in creating language that applies specifically to different opportunities, and it's kind of funneling ecological production systems to these opportunities? Does anybody really have their finger on this? An institution or organization or person?
So this is Mary Johnson from the Carbon Farming Innovation Network. Mm-hmm. One of our early action groups is on this kind of a big investment strategy. So we're bringing together a group of people with interest in creating this transformational shift of capital into regenerative agriculture. So part of what we expect will come out of this group is mechanisms and tools to connect the people who are looking for each other, need to find each other. So that's sort of in our early draft. We just started this group up this month, really, to the very, very beginning stages of this. But one of the other groups out there that has just gotten some significant funding to explore some of the tools that are needed for investors to be able to do this work is the Delta Institute, and they're working with a whole number of collaborators on a project to explore what's needed for investors to be able to put more capital into regenerative agriculture products. So there'll be a couple of groups starting to work on this, and hopefully that will bring together more and more of these conversations. They're certainly out there, but like other folks said, we don't all know about each other yet. So that could be a good role for Regeneration International to keep creating these conversations and tracking.
And yeah, as David mentioned, you know, a lot of people looking for these types of funding opportunities aren't necessarily experienced in the communication skills needed to get them. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for somebody to step in and help fill that gap between, you know, a Midwest farmer and helping them frame their farming operation in a way that's attractive to funders. Any other
Rachel?
questions or final comments?
Rachel?
Yes, Judy.
Hi, it's Judy. And I was just going to say that I think a lot of us now are distracted by reading the chat, and because there's a lot of action. But one gap that I've observed, and a colleague and I are trying to figure out how to address it, is that farmers, practitioners, ranchers, communicators who want to get into regenerative agriculture don't really find that there's an on-ramp to get in. And we saw this at Sterling College, of all places. It's a small, very progressive agricultural college in northern Vermont, where students were saying, hey, we get this now, how do we do it? And realizing, I'm just putting it out there, that there is a gap for people, young and beginning farmers. So.
Rachel?
Yeah.
This is Laura. One thing that occurs to me as I listen to all of this conversation and discussion is that I just want to encourage people that listen to this to remember that, let me start again. I think that as much as the sustainable agriculture movement, which I've been a part of pretty much since the beginning, has achieved, I think that we would have better served agriculture and food if we had tried or been more successful at engaging the larger conventional ag community. And so I really want to encourage folks to look for ways to successfully engage so that we can bring some of the funds that are in the conventional community into the regenerative movement, even though sometimes it's frustrating to work within that organization. And I know as well as anyone else on this call about that. But just to keep that in mind as we go forward, that absolutely we want a diversity of funding sources. But I think it would, I hope that I don't see regenerative agriculture in 20 years being this subset of agriculture in the same way that sustainable agriculture is. So I'd like to see it be an engine for the transformation of the food system.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I wholeheartedly agree with you. We have time for one more question, if anybody has a final question.
Well, this isn't a question, but it's a comment, and that is we've been talking a lot about where to get money from nonprofits or from foundations, but from our experience at Iroquois Valley Farms, there are people out there who are ready to invest money in something that might have even a very small return. And on the investment, and one of the things that we're not really talking about enough in this community right now is how do we apply or assign value to the carbon that's returned to the soils, the waters that are cleaned up, the restoration of the hydrological systems, even the value of, say, clean water to a community, or the value of increased fertility. I mean, yeah, there's some value to the farmer, but it's not universal. We're talking about a whole system of farming and regenerative agriculture that doesn't have a lot of value applied to what the impact results are. And until we engage the financial environmental community in helping us assign those values and create a market for those values so that investors will get a 1 or 2% return on their investment into those values, and the farmers will get a big return on putting in the labor and the hard work of restoring carbon to the soils, restoring the water cycles, we're not going to get anywhere with just foundations or just nonprofits. We really need to get the real investment community, where the real money is, into our world of important and valuable assets.
Thank you, Sally. Fabulous point to end our conversation today on. Thank you all very much. Thank you to the invited speakers for giving us your time today, for participating, and everybody that joined. If you have recommendations on future topics for these kinds of video chats, please email them to me, or you can email them to info@regenerationinternational.org. We're really interested in hot topics to engage in conversation.
Hey, Rachel, when Regeneration International forms the worldwide regenerative communications network, you're in the running for top anchor.
Thank you, Adam. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you all, and I hope to see you on a call in the future. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.